Hey guys, welcome back to VanCan and to another walk in the woods with me, Nick. If you watched my last video, you know I had to get my new 2020 Specialized Enduro warranted. There was a crack in the frame. And you saw that it was snowy and then it melted and I went riding, but now we have snow again, so I figured I would just tell you another story. And this is the story about how I almost lost $2,000 selling my bike on PinkBike. And, well, it goes like this. So back when I was still doing my undergrad, actually I was just graduating, I decided I was going to buy myself a graduation gift. I only BMX'd at the time, and I always kind of like trials, I kind of dabbled in it, and I decided to buy myself an Inspired Arcade, and that's kind of like a BMX/trials bike. I found one in Alberta that was older, it was 2017 at the time, and the bike was a 2014, so it was an older bike, it was on sale. I got the bike as a graduation present to myself, and at the time I didn't really know what I was doing. I was probably just trying to find a job in Winnipeg, and well, I'd just do that, get a job, make money, and do whatever. But I ended up coming to grad school here in Vancouver, and then since I was going back to school, I was like, you know what, I don't really need this extra bike, this Inspired Arcade. I don't ride it enough to warrant having, you know, another $2,000 bike just sit around. I mean, I gotta pay for school. So I decided to sell it. I hadn't sold anything on PinkBike ever, I guess. That was the first time I'd ever sold anything on PinkBike. And so I put it up for sale. I think I put it up for like $2,000 Canadian. I paid like $2,400. It was really new. It was new. It was old. It was 2014, but it was new. I'd only used it for like 2 or 3 months. So it was still a pretty new bike. Great condition. And at that price for that bike was pretty good. So a few weeks go by, I get some interest, but not really. And finally this guy from the States messages me and he's interested, but he doesn't really know. So we go back and forth a lot, and finally we exchange numbers, and it actually gets to the point where, you know, we're talking on the phone, he's asking me tons of questions. And he's asking all about, like, do I like riding the bike, how I like this, how I like that. I sent him tons of pictures. I scratched it a little bit, so I sent pictures of like the bash guard and things like that, the normal wear and tear. And we went back and forth for probably what must have been 3 weeks, like messages, emails, phone calls, all sorts of stuff. And finally, you know, he wasn't really sure. He was kind of like, I guess he was like me when I bought the bike, I wasn't really sure. He decided that maybe he could do it, he doesn't know. And he ended up saying, well, maybe if I could bring down the price a little bit, then he could do it. And I was like, okay. But this was kind of my first warning. So I was gonna have to ship the bike, and I was gonna have to do it through PayPal, which I wasn't super comfortable with. I like doing everything in person in cash. It just is a lot easier. And another thing that was sort of a red flag was he was not really sure. Like he wanted the bike, and he kept asking about it, but he always was like, well, you know, it's nice, but I don't know if I can afford it or if I want it that bad. And so I was kind of like, well, that's a bit odd. So he decides he wants the bike. He's like, yep, I've used up a bunch of your time. I'm gonna buy the bike. I helped him out as best I could, and I guess he appreciated that. So he's like, yep, I'll take the bike. So I set everything up through PayPal. I send him the invoice, you know, used bike, Inspired Arcade, 2014, all this stuff, and he sends me the money. Now I box up the bike and I get everything ready, and I ship it through whatever company, I can't remember, like FedEx or whatever one goes through the border, and I insure it. So I have to put insure it for the value of the bike. So I think I put like $1,200 or something of insurance. So it was like, yeah, it would cover most of it if it got broken or lost in shipping or something like that. Now at the time I was still really nervous, so I called PayPal and I was like, hey, you know, I'm sending this bike over the border. If he pays me, like, is there anything I need to worry about? Is my money there for sure? Am I gonna get it for sure? It's, you know, it feels really weird. Like, I'm just sending this thing off and hoping that I get money for it. And they're like, yep, 100%. Once like the money is in your PayPal account, that's it. It's done for sure. There's nothing more that, you know, that person could do to steal the money from you or anything like that. And so I was like, okay, phew, like, that's what I was really worried about, and that's why I went with PayPal. Now, here's where things start to get a bit tricky. I sent the bike, it's going across the border, and of course I've insured it for its value. Now when things go across borders, you have to pay, the import duties and stuff on it. And this guy gets an invoice, he's got to pay the duties on it. It's like, I can't remember what it was, like $88 American. And he calls me and he's like, oh, I can't afford that. I have to deny the bike. And at the time I was like, it had taken like a week to get to the border at this point, and I was like, what do you mean? Yeah, he like, you can't take it? He's like, no, I'm not going to accept it. And I was like, okay. So I called PayPal and I was like, hey, what happens if this guy doesn't accept it? They're like, well, then you have to give your money back to him. And I was like, hey, what? That's not the deal. This isn't like, he could just use all this time. I had to pay for shipping and all this stuff. And he's just denying the bike over $80. And this is making things really difficult because I was moving from Winnipeg all the way to Vancouver. Like, I was going to be gone. I'd have to get it shipped to Winnipeg to someone to pick it up and then ship it to me in Vancouver. It was going to be just crazy, so much hassle. So I messaged the guy and I said, hey, why don't you split it with me? I'll refund like $40 US or something like that. And after some convincing, he's like, okay, you know, we can do that. And another red flag that came up was he started to lecture me about how, oh, I shouldn't have declared the full value of the bike because that way he wouldn't have had to pay, you know, these import fees. And he started lecturing me about how I was naive and things like that. And I was just thinking the whole time, I was trying to keep the peace, just like smooth this over. But in my head, I was like, is this guy really lecturing me about how I should have committed fraud? And the lady at the store was even giving me a hard time when I was packing up the bike, making sure that like I did everything by the book. And this guy was giving me a hard time saying like, oh yeah, just commit some fraud. It's fine, just so I do a favor for him. And it was such a small amount of money, like $80. And it made things very stressful because that was like $2,000 he had paid me, and I really needed that. That was going to pay for so much, basically a whole semester of tuition. And I was getting really nervous at this point, but I smoothed it over. We split the import fee, and the bike got to him. Like I said, that was a red flag, and so the bike got to him, and he unpacks it and everything, and he messages me. He's like, hey, the bike looks great, you know, but I really shouldn't have spent that much money, and I feel bad for buying it now, but you know what, like, it's all done with. It's not my problem, or it's not my problem anymore, he was saying. And basically, he tried to tell me that I was out of the woods, you know. He decided to buy the bike, and now I had moved, and he was just going to keep it or sell it or do with it or deal with it himself and not try and get this money back from me. And I was like, oh, okay, it's done with. I'm free. I don't have to worry about this bike anymore. And I really want to emphasize that I definitely didn't pressure him in any way to buy the bike. When he would call me to ask about the bike, I would just tell him about it. And I repeatedly told him, it's fine. If you don't want the bike, that's totally fine. It's not a big deal. I will hold on to it and I'll find someone else to sell it to. So I want to emphasize it. There was no pressure on my part at all. It was totally his decision to buy the bike. And why I did that was, again, because I was moving and I couldn't afford to deal with what I ended up dealing with, which was this attempted return, like I was, you know, a Walmart where I could just take the bike back and give the money back and it would be fine, and you know, there was nothing bad would happen. So again, I think I'm done with this. I think I've sold my bike and I've got my money and I'm off to school and things are looking up. You know, I'm really excited about all that. And then finally, a few days later, I get another message that says, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't want the bike. I'll send it back to you. Just send me back the money. And I had to tell him, no, I can't. Like I took that money and I spent it. I sent it to the school for tuition. I can't just make $2,000 appear to send back to you. And he was like, then he started getting really aggressive, saying like, yeah, well, we'll see what PayPal has to say about this. And I was like, well, I guess we'll have to. And this is where things get even more stressful. So he was emailing me saying, you know, I sent him this bike that was way older than I said. It was all scratched up, all these things that I tricked him somehow. And I sent him an email saying, hey, here's the emails that we exchanged. Here's where I showed you all those parts that were scratched. Here's, you know, that I said, yeah, it's a 2014, but I bought it for him a few months ago, and here's the receipt and all that stuff. And once I showed him evidence of, you know, contrary to what all these things that he was saying about me, at that point, he just didn't answer. And then I got this message from PayPal saying, hey, we took $2,000 out of your account because you sold something to someone and it was, you know, not as advertised. Something was really wrong with it. And I was like, what? They just took $2,000 from me without anything. So even at this point, what's scary is the buyer didn't have to do anything. He just went to PayPal and said, hey, I bought this thing I don't like and I want my money back. even though the deal was, it was final sale. This is a used bike I was selling so I could go to school. I made sure of everything. There was nothing wrong with the bike. It was exactly as described with all the photos and everything. And here PayPal was like, yeah, well, too bad. You get your bike back and, well, yeah, that's it. End of the day, you gotta give the money back. So like I said, I get this message from PayPal saying, hey, you sold something that sucks and we took your money back. So I was like, what do I do? So I appealed it. I said, hey, no, everything is as described. Look, in the invoice, it says it's a 2014 bike. It has these scratches on it. This is final sale, all this stuff. And luckily for me, the guy who had bought the bike, I don't know, the way he wrote emails and texts and words was very confusing and didn't make a lot of sense a lot of the times. And so when he contacted PayPal, he basically just said, bike bad, not brand new as described. And that was his complaint. And then when I went to PayPal and appealed it, luckily I'd written final sale and 2014 bike in the invoice, and they just looked at that and said, oh, well, what is this guy talking about? And they reversed it. They gave me the money back. And I think I'm pretty lucky that that happened. I don't think that happens very often. I was just lucky that I had written that few lines in there that made sense, and the guy who was doing the complaining just wrote an incoherent complaint. So at this point, this guy is super mad. He's sending me all these texts telling me about how I'm a terrible person and blah, 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 blah. And I was just ignoring him. I was like, this is done. I really tried. I genuinely don't believe in any way that I cheated him at all. The bike at that price was a good deal. It was exactly as described. I sent all the photos. I can't imagine. I asked him before what else I could have possibly done to show you more of the bike, and that was one of those things he just didn't answer. So that's basically how I almost lost $2,000, and here's where it gets even a little crazier. He appealed my appeal, but luckily PayPal, once they side with you the first time, it's done with you, and now he's fighting PayPal. Apparently, he appealed that, and he got in contact with PayPal HQ somehow, and they refunded the money, half of it or something, back to him. So not my money. PayPal paid him like $1,000 because I guess they somehow thought that he was in the right, and somehow or for some reason they shouldn't have sided with me in the first place. And so he got my bike for like $1,000. And in my opinion, that's the really underhanded part of that story, is he got that bike for really cheap because he more or less scammed PayPal out of $1,000 and tried to drag me down with him. So the moral of the story, the advice I want to give you is, if you're ever selling anything and you're going to use PayPal, well, first of all, try and do it in person. But if you're going to use PayPal, do everything you can to document absolutely everything and appeal everything that you can. Always fight it as much as you can, as long as you're in the right. Don't try to cheat people, obviously, but when something starts to go wrong, you're going to be so happy that you've documented all this stuff. Sort of, I'm lucky I documented the right stuff. I wish I documented even more to be even more prepared, because I think I got lucky. But if anyone's out there and you're selling on PayPal, just document everything you can. You can Google PayPal horror stories. There's so many, and you know what? You be careful out there, guys. So thanks for watching. Hopefully we get some better weather soon, and hope you enjoyed another walk in the woods with Nick. See you guys in the next one.